Cuba is the largest island in the Caribbean Sea, and along with its neighbors makes up the Greater Antilles, a chain of islands formed millions of years ago when two of Earth's tectonic plates collided. Cuba is a long and narrow island, extending 1,200 kilometers from east to west, but only 100 kilometers wide in most places. The island has an area of 109,884 square kilometers and a population of about 11 million people. Its capital is Havana, which is the largest city in the country, where about 2.2 million people live. High mountains and rolling hills cover about a third of Cuba's area. The other two-thirds of the island are low plains used mainly for agriculture. Cuba has many different natural ecological zones, from mountain forests to jungles and grasslands. There are even small deserts. These different ecosystems are home to unique plants and animals found only in Cuba. Many interesting creatures live in the dense forests of Cuba. The most famous of them is the bee bumblebee, which is the smallest bird in the world. Adult bumblebees reach only 2 inches, 5 centimeters, in length. The smallest frog in the world also lives in Cuba. The United States has been hostile to Cuba since the Communists took power in 1959, but in 2015 the United States reopened its embassy in Cuba, where American diplomats live to work with the Cuban government. Shortly after, Cuba did the same to the United States. The original inhabitants of Cuba were the Siboney and Guanahatate people. About 1,000 years ago, the Taino people of Venezuela took control of the island. In 1511, Spanish forces defeated the Taino tribe and claimed the island as Spanish territory. The Spanish forced many Taino people into forced labor. Most of them died from exhaustion and diseases brought by the Europeans. Hundreds of thousands of African slaves were then brought to Cuba, mainly to grow and harvest sugarcane. American forces helped expel the Spanish from Cuba in 1898, and by 1902, Cuba gained independence. But the United States had a strong influence on the island. In 1959, communist revolutionaries, led by Fidel Castro, seized power. Classic cars in Cuba are an important part of the country's cultural and tourism scene. These cars date back to the 1950s and 1960s, due to the economic embargo imposed on Cuba by the United States during that period. But in recent years, the government has begun licensing new cars to enter the country. Unlike most Latin American countries, Cuba's favorite sport is not soccer, it's baseball. Baseball came to Cuba from the United States in the 1860s. Many international baseball stars have come from Cuba, and the Cuban national team is one of the best teams in the world.